Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today we have a special announcement. We will now be the salary cap show on Apple and Spotify. And the reason for that is because we have done a shift. We are now going to be focusing on stuff that is more our bread and butter. So what does that mean? We're going to be talking about salary cap fantasy football. For those of you who haven't played in that, that's dynasty, but with salaries and contracts, which in our opinion is the best type of fantasy football. We're also going to continue to talk about dynasty fantasy football, auction fantasy football. So those are your redraft leagues that have a auction draft format instead of a snake. Sometimes it's also referred to as salary cap. And then lastly, we're going to continue to talk about IDP. Hike! So Joe, let's talk about the first one. We have a 16-team Dynasty IDP PPR League, 110 million cap space. The trade here on the one side, we got Kyle Pitts at 5.9 million, Dontavian Wicks, 682,000, Jaron Hall, 840,000, Jalen Jones, 630,000, and Riley Moss, 525,000. In exchange, Cade Otton, 600,000, and Kyron Williams, 10.9 million. Thoughts on this trade?
Yeah, my initial thoughts here, just looking at it, I like the Kyle Pitts side of this trade. If this was pre-draft, I would have been all over this, going to get Kyron Williams as he was viewed as a top dynasty running back. But now with the Rams going with, Blake Corum, and, we've seen them, just kind of utilize that one back system when a guy's going good. That's ultimately, Kyron Williams benefited from that, but I just don't see him getting that, 77, 78% workload that he was able to obtain last year. Blake Corum is just he's a good back. He's elusive. He's got great vision as well. And, if he gets things going and shows that he can handle it as a rookie, I think he's definitely going to eat into the workload of Kyron Williams.
Yeah, it's interesting. Recently I heard the fantasy footballers talk about how they're not concerned about Kyron Williams at all, because if you look at the past, you've had instances like Travis Etienne, they brought in, who in a day two pick, they go ahead and draft Tank Bigsby. So that's like, people thought, which I did too. I thought that Tank Bigsby was going to eat a role, and he didn't. So they're trying to make that comparison. And I get that to a degree, but I also think you have to recognize this coaching staff who really rides the hot hand. Kyron Williams hasn't been able to stay healthy. I think he's been injured more often than not. And so as a result, I think this is a legitimate concern. And so I'm with you. I like the Pitt side because I wouldn't trust Kyron Williams. And I think at the end of the day, too, it's one of those things that's funny because when we talked about ideal landing spots for running backs, this was not an ideal landing spot for Corum or Kyron. And it's kind of a difficult situation.
Yeah. And, honestly, it puts them both as losers in my mind. Who knows? Maybe Jason from Fantasy Footballers is correct. We're just overreacting from the draft because, heck, that's what we do as fantasy players and especially dynasty players. But I don't know. I feel different about this one. Blake Corum's a different type of caliber back to me than, a Tank Bigsby, and feel like Corum can handle everything, even blitz pickups. But also to give up on Kyle Pitts right now, like if you stayed with him, his best year was his rookie season when Matt Ryan was quarterback, a veteran quarterback. He's had not a consistent quarterback since, and they've been playing the quarterback carousel. Now they pay Kirk Cousins, veteran quarterback that's been very productive. I think Kyle Pitts, has a chance to have a really good year this year.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% there, and not to mention Kyron Williams is 10.9 million, which is pretty hefty.
Yeah, I mean it's probably not a bad price, but also at 110 million, Pitts isn't as much, and you get to keep, Dontavian Wicks as well, who I think both of those guys have more upside than, what Kyron Williams short shelf life at running back, and then Cade Otton, you just don't know what he's going to be.
No, I don't like him, Joe.
Yeah.
So talking about another tight end, you did a trade. You traded away Mike Gesicki, who was 3 years, $14 million for his contract in exchange for a 2024 fourth-round pick. I think you'll probably be biased on this one, but thoughts on this trade?
Yeah, I'll be biased, Dave. I got to stand behind the trade I made here. But, for those of you wondering, I might have got a fourth-round pick. But in our league, that's not the last round of our rookie draft. We have 7 rounds in our rookie draft. So it's kind of the middle of the draft. that I've got now with the fourth rounder, and being in a rebuild team here, and given Gesicki's contract, I felt like it was a fair offer that I got for a fourth rounder. Was very disappointed with Gesicki, going to the Patriots and really not being able to contribute there. Thought he might get utilized more than what Miami was doing just because he didn't fit with Miami's system. And honestly, Durham Smythe fits better, believe it or not, with what Miami's doing. So yeah, I think Cincinnati Bengals is an interesting landing spot for Mike Gesicki, but a tight end hasn't really succeeded there. So I'll take the fourth round pick.
Yeah, it's interesting because we both were high on Gesicki when he went to the Patriots, and the idea of him partnering with Bill O'Brien from back in the day never materialized. I think his potential in Cincinnati is pretty interesting. I think honestly both teams can be winners here. I don't think there has to be a definitive winner and loser,
Right.
because the reality is you're going to use that fourth round pick for a non-tight end. And for that other team, if they were to use that fourth round pick for a tight end, who are you hoping for? Maybe Theo Johnson? I mean, more than likely, you're probably looking at a guy like Kate Stover. I just think that, Ben Sinnott, obviously Jatavian Sanders, and, Brock Bowers will be long gone. So I think that, who are you really going to get who can really be an impact player? Gesicki's got enough potential. I think it makes sense.
Yeah. Like you said, I think it was a good point. There doesn't always have to be a winning side and a losing side in a trade. Sometimes, trades can work out for both parties, and this might just be one of those.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, show your support to our channel by following us on Apple and Spotify under the Salary Cap Show, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Front Office Pros. If you want advice on your trades, head over to the Front Office Pros Twitter and fill out our Front Office Pros Dynasty Trade Inquiry Form, which gives us all the information we need to help advise you on what is the best move for your team. All right, Joe, so going to our next trade, you made quite the doozy. You traded away Isaiah Pacheco. He had a 1 year plus 1 option year for $500,000. Wide receiver Jerry Jeudy, 2 years, $25.5 million. Wide receiver Christian Watson, 2 years plus a 5th-year option worth $7 million. In exchange, you received tight end Luke Musgrave on a 3-year, $4.5 million contract. This is where it gets interesting. A 2024 third, 2 of them, a 2024 fourth, and a 2025 second. So again, you may be biased on this one, but what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I'll try to leave my biases out of this here, but as I said, I was rebuilding, and the owner I was trading with was really interested in Isaiah Pacheco, so try to capitalize. Gave up Christian Watson, who's a young receiver, but ultimately he just hasn't been able to stay on the field. Given his hamstring, that's really what's been holding him back. And then there's so many young wide receiver options on the Green Bay Packers too, so I felt pretty good about getting rid of him. And then Jerry Jeudy, I'm a Broncos fan, so obviously he's been a very disappointing player for me, being that he's been just a mediocre fantasy player that had higher hopes for. But going to the Cleveland Browns, they've even got an interesting wide receiver room in Cleveland, and ultimately I don't really trust Deshaun Watson to be able to get the ball to everybody either. And as you mentioned before in the prior trade, get rid of Mike Gesicki, picked up Luke Musgrave at tight end. I think he's, interesting young tight end, pretty cheap. And then, like you said, I got the boatload of picks for all those players. So what do you think overall, being that I was a part of this?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the thing that tips the scale for me is that 2025 second. And that's why I have it in favor of you, because I really like that second. That team finished as the worst team this past season. So although I do think that team is going to make a lot of improvements, are they going to make the playoffs? Are they going to be a top team? This league is a 16-team league. So to me, I really like you being able to net that second. I'm not as high on Pacheco as you are even, but as others, to me, obviously he did really well. I think you're selling him high. His contract's very favorable. That is a downside in this. The Jerry Jeudy one, I'm fine with. He's been a disappointment. Who knows if he could ever materialize in Cleveland? And I'm with you on Watson. I can't stay healthy. I'm a Jaden Reed fan. I have Jaden Reed. I was pounding the table for him once they drafted him. So for me, I don't think you lost all that much. And for your window right now, Pacheco, you're rebuilding. Pacheco, he's on once his first contract's over, the Chiefs bring him back. You know what I mean? So what's his
Yeah.
relevance left? He's basically got 2 years left of relevance, and you're not going to be ready in that time. So I think it made a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, even though he had a favorable contract, like you said, just him and his real life contract and then contract in our league, even though he's only a half a million, like it just didn't fit what I'm trying to do either.
All right, so our next, this is more of a trade inquiry here. 16 team dynasty IDP PPR, 110 million in cap space. Thoughts on Mike Williams at 5.4 million and or Gabe Davis 4.7 million dynasty wise? Either one of those guys would you be trading for, Joe, or would you pass it up on those guys?
Well, you know how I feel about Mike Williams, Steve. So I'm definitely not trading for him. But I think if you wanted to go ahead and try to acquire Gabe Davis, I think he could be interesting with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Um, and at 4.5, I mean, honestly, that's or 4.7 million rather. I think that's a pretty decent price. Or as long as you wouldn't have to trade a boatload for him, I think I'd be willing to take a stab at Gabe Davis and see what he can do in that Jags offense.
See, I think I'd pass on both at this point. I would lean more Mike Williams than Gabe,
Really?
especially with, well, just the fact that now we got Brian Thomas in the fold.
Mm,
And I think he actually will have a great opportunity to end up being the guy eventually. Kirk is going to be the guy for the foreseeable future.
right.
I just don't know how utilized Gabe Davis is going to be. Although Zay Jones isn't there, and we saw Zay Jones even was relevant at times. I mean, they have been able to support 3 receivers. I've always been a Mike Williams guy. You know that.
Yeah.
And I think with him and Aaron Rodgers, it could be very interesting.
But how many
Question is,
snaps is he
can they
going to
stay
play?
healthy? Right. I
Yeah.
know. I know. I wouldn't trade more on a 3rd-round pick for him.
What about Gabe Davis? What would you be willing to trade for Gabe?
In our league, probably a 4th or 5th, maybe. It's a deep receiver class. I think I'd rather take a shot at some of these other guys.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I might be able to. I might be willing to go. I'd say a 4th round pick.
Hmm.
For Gabe Davis. That's what I mean. I don't know if I wouldn't be giving up too much. 3rd might be too hefty, but 4th might be the sweet spot. And they paid Gabe Davis a whole lot of money, and I just can't imagine that he'd be irrelevant there. No Zay Jones, no Calvin Ridley anymore there. Trevor Lawrence has got to throw it to somebody. Might take a little bit for Brian Thomas to build that rapport coming in as a rookie. So why not Gabe?
All right, let's talk about the next trade, Joe. This one's kind of a nothing burger for some. We had Patrick Surtain, who had 1 year, 2 million, for a 2024 6 and a 2025 6. What's your thoughts on that trade?
Yeah, it was interesting. Before this trade was made, I had kind of pondered whether or not to reach out about Pat Surtain, but ultimately I didn't. And this trade got done very quickly once the owner put this Surtain on the block anyway. So I didn't really have a chance. But I think it is interesting. If the Broncos were ever to be able to get a good corner opposite of Pat Surtain, maybe he becomes more fantasy relevant. But honestly, what concerns me, especially in our league, so with our IDP scoring, it's all about the big plays, the pass deflections, and the interceptions. Surtain just doesn't, get involved enough with the pass deflections or making plays on the ball. He just is, always in great position, typically makes tackles, and that's not where the majority of the points go. So I mean, it was a low risk option. I don't blame the owner for taking a stab at the young corner. But like you said, I mean, it's not a trade that really stands out or people are gonna remember it.
See, I lean towards the Sertan side on this one pretty heavily. I mean, he's dirt cheap. He's a guy
He
who
is
I would
cheap.
say is a middle of the road corner, but what are you going to use that 6th-round pick for? I mean, it's really in my view, it's kind of a salary dump. But what kind of dump is it really? It's only 2 million. So
Yeah.
I think that in my view, I don't think the 6th-round picks are all that valuable. I think I'd rather have Sertan.
Yeah, just interesting too. Like typically the owner that acquired those 6th round picks doesn't value them either. So
I
interesting that this trade was made for 2 6th round picks. But
know it
I
is funny.
thought it was interesting. I mean, Sertan's been a disappointment at the cornerback position in terms of fantasy. So it is a low risk, high reward option, I feel like.
So going on to our next trade, we're going to do a little draft type of trade here. 16 team dynasty IDP PPR. Trade is 1.4 in the 3.16 for wide receiver Tank Dell and the 111. The team would take Neighbors at 1.4. So, what are your thoughts on that, Joe?
I think I would go ahead. I think I'd go ahead and do the trade away Tank Dell and take the 104 to be able to get Malik Neighbors.
Really? I'm surprised you said it because you're a big Tank Dell fan and you get the 111 on top of it.
Yeah, I am a Tank Dell fan, but I just feel like sure Neighbors didn't go to the best landing spot, but I feel like with his explosiveness, he's got the potential to be just a really dominant force in fantasy and in a really good ceiling play where Tank Dell we got the 1 year. They have Stephon Diggs now. Nico Collins is also there, emerged after Tank Dell got hurt. And who's to say, Tank Dell's a smaller receiver. Who's to say he doesn't, get rolled up on again when he's trying to block and get hurt? That's a bit of a concern moving forward. So I think I would be able to move off of him, take the 104, and get Neighbors, who everyone's saying is a Camus wide receiver prospect.
It's a tough one. I think it's
This was,
interesting
it is a
value.
tough call, yeah.
Yeah, I would probably lean towards what you said with the 1.4 with Neighbors because I think Neighbors is going to be elite. Dell had a great rookie year, but is he going to continue to do that? And at the 111, who are we really talking about? Like McConkey, maybe Trey Benson. So, I mean, if you're going to have a crack at an elite receiver like that with Neighbors, I'd roll the dice. I mean, you probably drafted Tank Dell with a 3rd or 4th round pick. So think about it from that. You're getting quite the return if you think about it from that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know Tank Dell kind of flew under the radars, and then all of a sudden got training camp buzz preseason, and then all of a sudden, hit the season hit the ground running and once the regular season started. But yeah, to be able to take potentially, a guy you got in the 3rd and upgrade to a 4th pick in the 1st round for that, I think I'd go ahead and do that.
All right, so next trade we've got the offer that came through was that you give the 105 Deshaun Watson and Rachaad White. In return, you get the 101 and the 208 in a 12-team Superflex dynasty. So thoughts on that, Joe? No salary cap components here, but this is rookie draft, so we are going to accept this trade.
So for me, looking at this, I would be just fine, trading the 105 Deshaun Watson and Rachaad White in order to be able to get the 101 and, have a decent, the 208 as well, another 2nd round pick, 12-team league, super flex. They've already got a boatload of quarterbacks. I'm not the biggest Deshaun Watson fan, that. And, 105, sure, probably the top receivers are off the board at that point, but I feel like you could still get somebody to impact the rest of your roster.
I don't know. I almost feel like that's kind of steep. I mean, 105. I mean, Deshaun, I agree with you. I mean, this team is pretty loaded at the quarterback spot. But you're giving away 105 and Rachaad White for the 101 and the 208 on top of Deshaun. I don't know. That seems a little rich in my view. I mean, Rachaad White, I guess they brought in Bucky Irving. I guess I'm not as concerned about him taking away volume from Rachaad White. I think I like the side of. I think you're getting. I wouldn't trade away the 105 Deshaun and Rachaad White to get the 101 and 208. You think I'm nuts?
No, I don't think you're nuts. I mean, I think that makes sense. But if you wanted to, you get the 101, you get your pick, you get to pick whoever you want. Like if they wanted to replace Deshaun with a Caleb Williams, they can, or you want to go after, Marvin Harrison Jr., just the Camus prospect. I think just the opportunity for that. There's not a lot of times, especially if you're a good team, there's not a lot of times you're going to be able to get that 101 on the fantasy draft. So I think to acquire that, Rachaad White's coming off a really good year, but how many more years in a dynasty does he have to be able to, produce and have the volume and opportunities that he gets. He's not that explosive player. He relies on the volume. I know might not be scared off by Bucky Irvin. I'm not necessarily either. I think he's more of a third down back, but at least, White was that 3-down guy. At least maybe he's not with Irving there. So I don't know. For the chance to get the 101 and, you get the 208, I think I'd be willing to roll the dice.
So another trade that we're going to accept the submission. We're going to be talking about a 20-team Dynasty IDP PPR Devy League. Which has tight end premium. We talked about Kyren Williams before. Was offered Kyren Williams for Trey McBride. Who would you rather have in that? I'm taking the McBride side all day long.
Yeah, that's the way I was leaning as well. I would take McBride in that. We mentioned our concerns with Kyren Williams, but just being able to see the strides that McBride has had, and I feel like now the upgrade with bringing in Marvin Harrison Jr., the upgrade wide receiver position might just help open them up the middle of the field for McBride. And with Kyler Murray being hopefully back with the whole season if he's able to stay healthy, I think McBride could be in it for a good season.
All right, Joe, let's round out part 1. We got part 2. In our next episode, we talked about 9 trades. We'll be talking about another 9 in our next episode. But I recently did a trade. I want to get your thoughts. I traded away Joshua Palmer, who had a 1-year, $5 million contract, and a 2026 third. In exchange, I received tight end Isaiah Likely, 2 years, $3 million, and a 2026 4th-round pick. So which side do you like there, Joe?
Yeah, I think, and I'm not just saying this to be nice to you, Steve.
Okay.
I think I prefer your side, honestly. I've got my concerns with Joshua Palmer and his relevancy now that, Chargers, they drafted Ladd McConkey. Quentin Johnston is still there. And everyone's expecting the passing volume to be less with Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh being there. They've beefed up the offensive line. They got Gus Edwards. Plan is to really run the ball. So, I think, trading away Joshua Palmer makes a ton of sense, especially, for you. You're also in a rebuild situation. You like Isaiah Likely as well. He's an intriguing young tight end. And if we saw what could happen. If Mark Andrews does happen to go down, if anything happens, Likely stepped right in there, was a really fantasy relevant tight end or a tight end premium league. This move made a ton of sense.
It's funny because Isaiah Likely was a guy I liked during the draft process, and the other owner sniped him, before I could really get a chance to get him. I'm with you. I soured on Palmer. I think as I understood more about McConkey in probably a more rushing heavy offense, I kind of questioned what the role Palmer would have. And so that ultimately made me start thinking I should shop this guy. And then that made me think, well, what about a guy like Likely, who I do like? I think he has a lot of potential. To me, he's a guy who, once Andrews leaves, if they still have Likely, I think that he could be pretty good. So I have him for 2 years. I think at the end of the day, it was worth the risk. And my tight ends were horrible. I've got Schoonmaker, I think, as my only tight end. So I needed some help pretty badly.
Yeah, I mean, like any other form of fantasy, if you don't have one of the top guys, it's a pretty bleak outlook at the tight end position. So I think, being able to, sure, you trade back in the draft around, but to be able to move Palmer and, upgrade your tight end position with Isaiah Likely, who's a young, intriguing player, I like the move for you.
So that does it for our episode where we analyze some salary cap fantasy football trades with some dynasty trades sprinkled in there. This was part 1. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to check out part 2. In our next episode, we're going to go through another 9 trades, most of them about salary cap fantasy football. You're not going to want to miss that. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.